So Taron Egerton really is Mr. Apple TV Plus and Mr. Biographical Thrillers right now, and to be honest, he does such a good job as both of them, and he does such a good job in this movie playing Henk Rogers, a guy who is desperate to get the licensing rights of Tetris, and he is pretty much in every single scene of this movie, and I have to say, he just carries it so well. I mean, he's such a talented actor, as he really is able to play a whole range of different emotions in this movie, and you really are with him quite literally as he is traveling the globe just trying to secure this license. Now, I thought that this movie would be a lot more inspired and a lot more similar to WeCrashed, which was the origin storyline of WeWork with Jared Leto and Anne Hathaway. Incidentally, also on Apple TV Plus, and I absolutely loved that series. So I was so excited going into watching Tetris, and it is good, but it is just so obsessed with communist Russia and all of the spying that takes place and all of the coldness, quite literally, in Moscow, and you can really tell the difference between communist Russia and capitalist America, and all of that is interesting, and of course is true to the storyline that took place with this guy, but I just feel like it didn't grip me enough because of this. And as a result, I have to say, half of this movie did feel like a bit of a hit piece on Russia, which of course are really topical at the moment, so in some ways it is really interesting and educational to see what the world of Russia really is like and how different this is to the rest of this world. And of course, all of the business dealings that take place are absolutely fascinating. I loved all of the characters actually involved with this, and how crooked and how deceptive and how cutthroat business really is, especially at the top, and how you really can't really trust anyone. And the Maxwell family, who are of course billionaires because they are so successful within the tech space, and how this transpires from a father who has made it and with a son who is really trying so hard to prove himself and to get out of the shadow of his father. And because he is so privileged and so egotistical, the way in which he deals with a lot of other people, especially very intimidating people, is actually pretty fascinating. And certain people that have got that much amount of wealth haven't necessarily achieved it in the most legal way. So I feel like all of that stuff is really interesting. Of course, the storyline predominantly took place in the 1980s, and I do feel like they recreated the 1980s really brilliantly, as you do feel like you have transported back in time into the 1980s. And of course, the technology at that time was of course 8-bit technology, and they definitely have interwoven that across this movie. At some points, it does feel a little bit cheap and a little bit annoying, but at the end of the day, this is a free movie on a TV streaming service, and I do feel like it's right at that level. In terms of my enjoyment across this movie, it definitely did go up and down, but the end chase sequence was absolutely outstanding. Literally did feel like something you see in superhero movies, and it was just so adrenaline paced. Literally does keep you on the edge of your seat, as it is honestly so awe-inspiring, and there are constant twists and turns that take place as well, so it really does add a lot of jeopardy to the brilliant final sequence. I have to say, from a final sequence perspective, this movie was absolutely wicked. And just before the credits roll, I thought it was a really nice touch how you get to see what happened next with all of the real life counterparts with all of these different characters. And on that point, it is a bit of a shame that Taron Egerton is playing somebody in real life who was actually Indonesian and Dutch. So it does feel a little bit like they did a bit of whitewashing with the lead character. But that being said, given all of that, Taron Egerton does do a good job in this role. And it really does show the importance of contacts as well as licensing and contracts. And like I said, how you really can't trust anyone, even if they do seem to be your friend, even if they do seem to be your lover. I feel like when that much money gets involved, you really do unfortunately get to see a dark side to a lot of people. What I did think was interesting though is in the beginning of this movie, everything seems to be a little bit too easy for Henk Rogers, and he is a really cool character in terms of having so much grit and determination and really believing in himself and never taking no for an answer and just being a really good sales and deals man. But then as the movie progresses, you get to see that he just becomes even more and more desperate, and he almost loses everything. So I feel like you really are with him through the highs and the lows. And it is a really famous saying that, you know, you sign the best deal at that time. And I feel like this movie really does give a lot of new meaning to that phrase, as well as of course showing the power and how much of a global sensation Tetris really was, as well as, you know, an interesting perspective on business in terms of how much you can make a game work in so many different arenas. For example, the arcade space, the in-home console world, the computer world, the handheld world. So I feel like, you know, it really does show how advanced technology is and how sometimes a lot of older people don't necessarily get it from a technology perspective and the importance of contracts that take place within this space as well, and how sometimes if you sign a new contract, this can actually be to your disadvantage. And if you didn't necessarily grow up during the time in which Tetris was at its high, then I feel like this is a really interesting lesson. But if you did live through that, then I can imagine this movie must be an absolute joy to just relive all of that and get to see what really happened behind the scenes. As from a consumer perspective, you know, we only really see the end product and what we are served from brands, but it's really fascinating what happens behind the scenes, especially with big conglomerates like Nintendo, like Sega, like the creators that actually aren't massive conglomerates. So, you know, all of that is really, really interesting. So, you know, Tetris is definitely a worthwhile watch. I was personally expecting a little bit more from it, but I definitely can see a lot of enjoyment to be had from this film. As like I said, especially if you are so fascinated by how Tetris became the global phenomenon that it is. But, you know, for all of those reasons, I'm going to give Tetris a solid 5.5 out of 10. Now, I'd love to hear what you thought of this film, so please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in my next video.